Well, now that I'm done describing what happened to this Ford Crown Victoria earlier, I just got through doing that, the engine's still warm. Time to circle back and get back to this Mercedes-Benz 280SC and put these axle shafts back in. If you guys remember, I had to take these axle shafts to a shop and have the old bearing taken off and a new one pressed on, as well as replace the outer axle seals on these backing plates. And they went ahead and used some RTV sealer and put on these paper gaskets as well too. And they did a very good job cleaning up all the grease and gear oil and everything else off of these backing plates to get them like new. And since this job has taken such a long time, just want to do it little by little, be very methodical. There's no reason to rush it and cut corners. I've got, you know, several other cars, well actually one less now, that I can drive. So it's not an emergency to get this on the road. You can tell it's been raining earlier, and because we have metal exposed like this, it doesn't usually see the light of day. What I ended up doing for temporary storage is just taking a light coating of grease and just coating all these surfaces inside of here just to make sure that we didn't have any corrosion starting to develop on these machine surfaces. And that ended up working out very well for me because it still looks like new. And some of the fasteners fell off onto the ground and it's wet, but they're not rusted at all. All I gotta do is wipe off the grease and clean them up, put them back on, and wipe this down thoroughly as well too. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to take a new inner axle seal. This is what they look like. They're kind of cone shaped, and if you look very closely on the outer surface, it's machined down a little bit to kind of aid in getting it started into the bore, and to help it grasp the axle shaft tightly, it's got this little garter spring around the side of it that fits into a groove. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to clean up all inside of there, and we'll need to drive in a new seal in that direction. And then once that's done, we'll have to work on these axle shafts. This is the one on the passenger side because it has this little clamp on there, and this is the driver's side that we're working on today. I've got a kit that contained the new seals, as well as a new slot nut and the new washer, and that's going to have to be driven on there, and then the bearing packed with grease, and then the whole assembly put back into the car. And due to the fact that this inner seal is quite a bit recessed into the axle tube there, I've had to come up with a special tool. I'm not even sure if it's going to work. I just got all these parts at Home Depot. I got a pipe cap, then a 1 1/4 inch piece of straight pipe, and then a coupling, 1 1/4 inch coupling on the very end to make a surface suitable for pounding in the bearing evenly. And the important thing to remember is that you only want to apply force on the metal part of the seal, not the rubber part. You want to get on the outer surfaces to drive it in as evenly as you can. And that looks like that'll fit on there just right. The important thing is to get it started in evenly, and then you can go around it later on with a screwdriver or drift punch or some other suitable tool, and go around the circumference and make sure it's tapped in properly. There's a little bit of a ridge right there that's actually right back there, if I can get the light in there, that'll stop that seal from going in any further. So you'll hear a change in pitch once you start tapping around that seal, and that way you'll know that the seal's bottomed out. So anyway, let me get started and take some brake cleaner, clean off the residual oil that's on these bearings, blow them out with compressed air, make sure they're absolutely clean and there's nothing inside. And then do the same for this, get this all cleaned up, and then we'll be ready to go in. Okay, now that we have everything all cleaned up and degreased, we've got nice shiny metal. So putting that coating of grease on there while I could, before I could get to the job, while this rain did the trick. There's no corrosion. So now to drive that seal in, I've coated the inside surface of the axle tube with a very thin coating of grease just to facilitate getting that on in there. And you can see this bright area is the ridge where that seal is going to make contact to be driven all the way down flush. And I've got the seal all cleaned up, and you just want to make sure that garter spring is all the way around there and not trying to pop off. Sometimes they'll do that during shipment. And we'll try to get that in there and get it started as evenly as possible. These things are always really tricky to get in because they'll pop back off in different directions because it's just really hard to get an even force. And now with this homemade tool here, you could use a large socket. I just don't have a socket this big. I'm going to try to drive that in with a hammer as evenly as I can just to get it started. So we'll see how that works out. Doesn't take a whole lot of force. You don't really have to pound on it too much. You don't want to damage the seal. Although if that does happen, I have another one. The name of the game is to get on the outer edges of the seal and get an even lick on it with a hammer. Which is almost impossible to do. It's in flush there, but it's starting to come out at the top. So what you have to do is use a combination of that big tool there and a drift punch and start driving it in all the way around the circumference here and work it back and forth just to make sure that it's going in evenly. So that'll take a few minutes, but let me go ahead and start doing that, and we'll see what the result looks like. Okay, the new seal went in without much incident. Didn't take too long, probably about 5 minutes, and worked it around with a drift punch. Very, very lightly actually. Once this thing gets started evenly, it's not that difficult to get back in, so you don't want to pound on it. You can see a couple of witness marks right there where it deformed just a little bit. It's really hard to get these in without having a little bit of marks on there. But what you want to do is get this punch on the very outer edge, as far out as you can, to go around that perimeter and make sure that it's bottomed out. And then what you want to do, just to be on the safe side, is take a ruler and make sure the measurements are the same all the way around. In this case, 9 millimeters. Yours may be a little bit different. But that just makes sure that the seal is nice and flush against there. The reason you want to go on the outside of the seal with the punch is you want to try to take advantage of the strongest part of it. If you get more toward the middle of that surface there, you're going to dent it in a little bit. So now that seal's already in, we're going to focus our attention now on this axle shaft. It's already been built up at the shop and prepared for installation, already cleaned. What's going to happen is we've got two things we got to put on here. The first one is a locking washer, and it's got a raised area on one side and a flat area on the other. This raised area goes against the inner bearing race. So that's going to go on there just like that. You can see this flattened area there on the washer mating up with the flattened area on the axle shaft. And you want to make sure that that's nice and level against that bearing there. And then the slot nut for the retainer goes on. That just screws down. This doesn't have to be tightened very much because the force exerted on it's actually lateral. It's not rotational. So you just want to... There is a special tool for this, but I don't have one. I'll just take a screwdriver and tighten it down good and snug. And then what you're going to have to do is stake up these edges on this washer on both sides to prevent that nut from backing off. Here's the old inner seal, which is actually not in too terrible of a, or too bad a shape, but still letting gear oil out. What's going on in here, once you're all done, you can see where the seal has been making contact with this machined surface of the shaft. What you're basically doing is forming a little chamber in there for grease. This whole cavity here is going to have to be filled with regular wheel bearing grease. And there's a little bit of controversy about that, at least as far as I'm concerned. The book does mention that these bearings had to be packed. When I took it down to the shop, the mechanics I talked to really never were in agreement whether this bearing is packed or if it gets lubrication down the axle tubes like on a Ford 8.8. And the book says it's lubricated with axle grease inside here, and you do have this inner seal and outer seal, and it just makes sense to do it like that. This is a swing axle, which means the axle shafts will actually articulate like that, so you can't always guarantee you're going to get an adequate lubricant supply to these bearings. That's probably why Mercedes went ahead and designed it like that. They wouldn't put these inner seals in here if they did not intend to separate the gear oil from the grease. So I'm going to go ahead and play it safe. I'm going to clean this bearing first, make sure it's all clean with the brake fluid. Pack it full of the grease, and go ahead and stick it in there. And worst comes to worst, I mean, if you get a little bit of cross-contamination between the axle oil and the grease, that's okay. It's not going to be that big of a deal. So I'd rather err on the side of caution and not dare take a chance on running that brand new bearing dry and have to do this all over again and get metal inside the differential and everything else. It would just be a catastrophe. I've already had enough catastrophes for this week and certainly don't need any more. So let me go ahead and get this all cleaned up. I think I'm gonna, I think I gotta pack the bearing first. I kind of hate to do that because the act of putting these things on here might get some contamination in there. But after this stuff is put on here, I don't really see a very easy way to force grease all up inside there. So let me go ahead and get that done, tighten this down, stake these up, and we'll be ready to slide this thing back on in where it belongs. Okay, just wanted to stop in the middle of the process here. I've got grease all packed around, and what you want to do is take your grease and just put a bead all the way around the circumference of the bearing, and then use your finger and just start mashing it in, press it in, very much like how you pack front wheel bearings on cars. And you want to keep doing that till you start seeing some grease coming out the other side there. As you hopefully, if I can get the camera at a better angle, you can see it starting to come out. That means that you've made it through the entire surface there. So the next thing to do is to add a little bit more grease. You don't want to overdo it, but I want to fill these chambers up in here a little bit that'll be formed by the inner and outer seals. Make sure we got plenty of grease in there. And then we'll go on with our washer and slot nut. Okay, I got the slot nut on, and I've got one of these areas staked, and I found a good trick you guys can use because there's not really a lot of clearance in here, and you don't definitely want to take a chance on damaging that bearing, prying against that bearing just to bend that up. This metal is fairly soft, it's designed to be bent up like that, so it wouldn't apply too much force there. But I found an easy way to do that is with a pair of good needle nose vice grips. So what I ended up doing is getting these on there as far in the middle as I can, and then pressing down and then bending up. And I'll attempt to show you guys the process, show you what it does. Let me zoom in here. Just want to work the jaws in there, prying up as you go along. Try to get as close to the end as possible. And then start clamping down. And as you clamp down, go ahead and tilt it upward. And what that's going to do is just get things started where we can take a punch and start driving it in closer to this area here to prevent the slot nut from backing out. And as I've shown before, mounting the axle on the tire like that a little bit above ground is actually working out pretty good as a working surface. So I'm going to go ahead and finish staking that in. We'll apply some sealer around that little gasket there, and we'll be ready to go in. Okay, now that we have the axle and bearing and retainer assembly all put together and bearing packed with grease, I've also got the outer surface of the bearing packed with grease to make it easier to drive in. Not sure how hard that's going to be. And I got some sealer around the perimeter of the gasket there, so this guy's ready to go in. And before we do that, we want to make sure once again that the mating surfaces are completely clean and free of any kind of debris, because there's no filter in here to filter that stuff out. So once it gets in there, it's going to stay in there and get ground in. And lastly, as I said before, there's a garter spring around the circumference of that seal, and you just want to take your little finger, if you can, if your hands are small enough, and feel around inside there, and make sure that garter spring was not dislodged partially or all the way and end up in that tube. So also, I cleaned the outside of the mating surface for that paper gasket with the brake cleaner to make sure that we're going to get good adhesion and good sealing action on that. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in. On some cars, the splines on the axle, there's like a key on there. One spline is wider than the other. This car doesn't appear to be made like that, so it doesn't matter, at least not on this particular axle on the driver's side. So I think we should be okay to go ahead and slide it in and see how that works. One of the things you want to look out for when you slide this thing in is to give it as much support as possible and not let it drag on that inner seal and distort the seal. It's a little bit heavy, but that's okay. Sometimes you can get on the outer flange like this, tilt it up, and start to feel where it engages into the spider gears. gradually work it in there. I'm going to have to find a way to pound that in. It's a little bit of a friction fit, but I think you guys get the general idea. And then once that's put in, we'll go ahead and be able to screw our backing plate against there and secure everything. Okay, everything is all installed. Axle is fully engaged in the splines and the spider gear beside the differential, and the backing plate is all torqued down. And just a note, just like when you tighten wheel lug nuts on a car, I went in a cross pattern just to make sure that I got a nice even force on that. Then I went ahead and pounded on it again. First thing I did is I just simply drove it in further with a regular rubber mallet, and that's really all it took. Didn't really take a whole lot of force, and having the some axle grease around the circumference of that bearing really made it easy to go in. Then I torqued everything down, and then as a last measure I took a metal hammer and a block of wood and drove it in, or pounded on it with a little bit more force, just to make sure it was fully bottomed out, and it was. And I would have known that it wasn't, because if when I had done that, I would have been able to tighten these bolts even further, and I wasn't. So I know that this axle is fully bottomed out and not going to go anywhere, and it's ready to have the parking brake shoes installed, and then the rotor, and then finally I can get to rebuilding the caliper and putting everything back together. The passenger side is going to be done in exactly the same manner as the driver's side, so there's no point in videoing that. That's just going to be too redundant, but hopefully this procedure gave you guys the right idea of how this is actually done. You can see that new seal in there now that this is all cleaned up, and the machine surface of the axle that it's riding on. And you can kind of feel as you rotate this around, you can feel those spider gears turning, so I know everything is fully engaged, so we're not going to have any issue there. So the next thing is going to be to go ahead and do the same thing to the passenger side, and then I'll make another video series about installing the parking brake shoes. So you guys stay tuned for that.